Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Chatting with the Lightkeeper. I'm Edward, or otherwise known by kind of the online persona, I guess, if you will, the Lightkeeper. And this week we are going to chat about poly and kind of how it all fits into BDSM. And before we get into that, just a quick word of warning. As I'm recording this, it is springtime here in my fair city, which means, April showers, it's still April, do bring May flowers. And the showers that are approaching here today might include the joyful rumble of thunder. So if you hear something in the background that sounds like thunder, that is indeed what you heard. So the laptop battery is charged up to record this. Should there be a wind that knocks down a power line or lightning strike, I am good to go. So I am not reliant on the electricity rolling in continuously to get this done, which is kind of nice to have that just in case. I do love a good thunderstorm. I know people tend to be split on them. Either people love them or they do not care for them. I embrace them, love them. The only time I don't enjoy them is in my youth. Goes back to the same reason why I am not a fan of bondage, is I crewed on a sailboat that raced, and I had worn all kinds of knots, and thus why I don't enjoy bondage, because to me it brings back the drudgery of having to learn how to tie and untie all kinds of knots in order to kind of be taken on as an apprentice of the sailboat skipper that I crewed for, which was a fantastic overall experience. Just the whole knot thing was not for me. But anyway, long story short, we were sailing in a race that took a few days and was out on one of the Great Lakes, out in the middle of it, which is a Great Lake. You hear the word lake and you think, lake. I don't know if you're in England, you might think the Lake District or, um, you know, something smaller, get on the pontoon boat, go out on the lake and go fishing, or spend the day just, floating around, jet skiing, water skiing on a small lake. And the Great Lakes are really inland seas. The boat I was on that raced, we were 42 feet, and the waves that during that storm ran, oh, they were, I don't know, 3 stories, which is roughly what they were, which was sort of like, I don't know, it was bobbing around like uh, a little koi boat in a pool with a kid splashing it all over the place. It was absolutely kind of scary. And then the top of the mast, which is the big pole in the center where the sails go, started to glow kind of greenish. It was a really weird thing. When what I was seeing was St. Elmo's fire, which is an actual thing. It's not just a movie or a song, but it's an actual thing. And it's because all the charges that were in the air, and the mast was a point where the lightning could find its home, so it was kind of glowing because of the charging. And I remember the captain saying, "Hands off anything metal. Don't touch anything metal." And just after he said that, there was just a brief pause and then crack. And it was a very loud crack. I don't recall seeing a flash. I just remember the crack. And there was another boat that we were racing that was probably 50 yards away from us. And the lightning struck its mast and it broke right in half. And yeah, it was kind of a wow. Um, thank you to whatever higher power there might be or not be, but in that moment there was definitely some higher power in my world. Um, I'm not sure what it is or what it was then either, because by then, Jesus and I had agreed to see other people. But I was very thankful it was somebody else instead of me, because I am not a strong swimmer. In fact, um, my gear that I wore when it rained or stormed, looked like I don't know, like the fisherman that's on the cover of the boxes that with fish sticks where they're in the orange or yellow, bright yellow outfit. Mine had flotation built into it, so if I was swept overboard during a storm or rough weather, my what they call foul weather gear would actually keep me afloat in addition to the life vest I wore, because like I said, swimming on top of the water in myself is not good. I'm great underwater. In fact, I enjoy diving, but not swimming on top, which, it's neither here nor there. It is what it is. But anyway, I don't know how I got to that point, but I guess it was the fact that it might storm. But let's get back on track and kind of talk a little bit about poly. Now, this podcast is not going to be a deep dive into it. I'll be honest, I am not an expert in poly. I, full disclosure, had one poly relationship, which was sort of a combination of a hierarchy based poly relationship, also intermixed with a bit of kitchen table poly, which, if you don't know what that means, we'll get to that. But needless to say, and it might sound weird, I'm a dominant, but I wasn't the primary partner. I was I was a secondary partner, and it was a dumpster fire because of myself. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't seek out resources to learn about it. My communication skills then are not what they are now, so I didn't communicate clearly. And yeah, it ended up being a dumpster fire. So, and I put it all on my shoulders. Probably, probably it's me taking too much of the blame, perhaps, but that's how I see it. And so it's my podcast, and that's how we'll roll with it. I also don't I don't identify as a poly person. At this point in my life, I'm looking to find my person, and if I find my person, I figure the whole whether it's poly or not poly, that will work out because we'll communicate, and because I found my person and they found their person, if they are a person who not only wants to have a person but have people, that would be fantastic. And we'll go from there. So I don't have the preconceived belief that I have to be one way or the other. It's all about starting with one partner and building from there and seeing how it goes. So that's, I guess, the background that I am coming from. So before we dive in deeper, one of the, I guess, initial things we need to talk about is the difference between what is commonly referred to as an open relationship and a poly relationship, or, being inclined to have a relationship that's open and having a relationship that's poly. So let's start there with that sort of very basic thing. And an open relationship, kind of think of it as, I mean, you can be kinky, you can be into BDSM or not, but it's a relationship that is sort of, I guess I would say, monogamous with a twist. And that twist is that you and your partner are super committed to each other, but you're also able to have sort of casual flings, sexual encounters with others, obviously consensually. Partners know what's going on, there's no secrets, and maybe even friends with benefits, but there's no romance. It's strictly more on the encounter level. Sort of think swinging would be an example of an open relationship. So it's typically more about physical exploration and enjoyment than they are about forming deep emotional connections outside of that primary relationship. Now, being poly is about having multiple romantic relationships. Of course, once again, all with informed consent. It's not about having casual flings or a friend with benefits. I mean, although you could be poly and still do those things, but the actual being poly is about having multiple loves. And really, I believe I am not I'm a history geek, but word history is not in my wheelhouse there. But I do believe poly means many and amore means many. So polyamory is multiple loves, whatever the root language is for it. So it's, I guess, sort of the easy way to think about it is having multiple loves, rather than just one and done. Um, I thought of an analogy of how to explain it. And it's springtime, so I've been playing in the dirt quite a bit, which got me thinking about gardening. And in an open relationship, imagine you and your partner have a garden. You tend it together, you plant it together, you harvest it together, you do all of that stuff together. But in your garden, you each have a section where it's sort of like your experimental section. Each of you can grow different flowers or maybe different vegetables in your little experimental section. And it's all a part of the same garden, but the garden sort of has some personal space in it that you can do what you want in your personal space area of your garden plot. Now, Holly, on the other hand, is having not one garden, but having multiple gardens, and each garden is unique, and each garden is special. Um, each garden is nurtured with the same love and care, and each of those gardens brings you joy, potentially in different ways, but each garden brings you amazing joy. There may be some crossover, like sharing gardening tips or sharing plants between the gardens, or perhaps, you know, you tend the garden, this garden kind of together, or this garden over here is separate. But each garden thrives independently and brings just the same amount of joy. So that's my gardening analogy. I hope that helps kind of clear things up just a little bit. So next we're going to move into looking at really what are the core principles of being poly. And just like we talk about in BDSM and DS or being kinky, consent and communication are obviously key because you have to be able to have open and honest communication. You have to have, enthusiastic consent. Consent, of course, is key, just like it is in the land of kink. It's also non-exclusive, meaning that, you allow for multiple connections. It's not an exclusive connection. There's no you're mine and I'm yours, and then there's nobody else. You are able to and encouraged to have multiple connections. And the other thing is that there's compersion. You find joy in your partner's other relationships, even if you're not involved in them. You have joy because your partner is happy. So it's really kind of a mindset of an abundance of love. There is also individual autonomy. Just because you're in a relationship potentially with multiple people, everyone respects each other's independence, and all decisions are made with mutual respect. And I think even if you identify fully as monogamous, making decisions based on mutual respect is something that can be applied to really any even friendships, any type of ship in your life, friendship, relationship. When you make decisions based on mutual respect, it makes that whole ship stronger. Poly is also very customizable, just like BDSM. There's no potentially right or wrong way to do it. There are, you know, unsafe or unproductive ways, but it's customizable. You can make it work how it works for you, and it's fluid. It's going to allow you to be flexible and adjust relationship structures as relationships evolve. And of course, there is the emotional honesty. You have to be able to be honest. You have to be able to talk about raw emotions. You have to be able to build trust, just like you would in any relationship. But of course, those are even more important because we're dealing with multiple people. The other thing to look at and to think about too is society trains us, if you will, to climb the escalator when it comes to romance and relationships. Whether you're kinky or vanilla, we are taught from early on that we hop on the relationship escalator. You start with, liking somebody, then you go on a few dates, then you start dating them exclusively, then you talk about getting married, then you talk about having a family, buying a house, and having that white picket house with or without the dungeon in the basement. That's up to you. Um, Whereas a lot of people who identify as poly um, will not embrace the escalator. They will sort of pick and choose what they want as goals in the relationship. Do they just want to have a committed relationship, or do they want with this particular partner to, you know, to go on to marriage or to go on to family, children, house, picket fence. So you have the non-escalator version of relationships, often much more common in poly settings. Now, with poly relationships themselves, there are a whole huge bunch of types of relationships. And they all sound like everything fits neatly, like hierarchical, solo poly, non-hierarchical. I mean, all these types of relationships that are out there, they all sound neat and tidy. And the thing is, just like everything else in life, it's not necessarily neat and tidy. You can take bits from this one and combine it with bits of that one to make what works for you. These are just sort of familiarization points or things you will hear people describing their relationships as. Now, in the wonderful world of BDSM, where we like to have, the dominant, the leader, the submissive, who consensually follows that, there's a hierarchy. Dominant lead, submissive follow. Kind of the short, uncomplicated version, the super super short Reader's Digest condensed book version, if you will. But in poly, there are hierarchical relationships where there is a structured and clear hierarchy between partners. This person is my primary. This person is a secondary partner, or this person is, kind of third down the list. In hierarchy, you see that sometimes in BDSM. This is where alpha submissive first came to be. Not as we think of it now in it. It's a parallel, and in the olden days, when I was a wee little nipper snapper learning about the lifestyle, if somebody said they were an alpha submissive, that meant that they were in a hierarchical poly relationship, and they were the top submissive, and underneath them in their relationship were other submissives that were secondary and possibly even ranked. Back in the olden days, they used Greek letters. That's where alpha comes in, and it's been a long time since I was in a fraternity. I used to know the whole Greek alphabet. I don't anymore. But they use the Greek alphabet to label where submissives fell in a household or in a relationship. And when somebody is a secondary partner, it means they're kind of less of a priority in the primary partner's life. It doesn't mean they're not loved or loved equally. It's just that they are not the the primary partner. And so it can be very complex and very human of us to want to put things in a hierarchy to make it so everyone understands their place and their role. And that works for some people. Now, of course, the opposite is also true. There's non-hierarchical. Boy, that's going to be a tongue twister for me. And my brain is coming up with no good ideas of other words to suggest to myself to say here. But in relationships that don't have that hierarchy, the partners involved, they don't want it. They want to have everyone treated sort of equally of importance, equally of value, and each one has, an equal amount of autonomy in the relationship. Typically, decisions are kind of collectively made, or it's a consensus of all the partners involved. It sort of tries to foster a sense of equality amongst everyone involved in the relationship. Now, if you are newer to poly, the next thing I'm going to say might seem really odd. The term solo poly. Being solo poly, my first thought when I first heard this term my first thought was, okay, somebody who identifies as solo poly, that means they're single, but they're letting everybody know that they're poly. They're single, but hey, up front, I'm single, but I'm also poly. So if we get involved in a relationship, I'm going to be interested in having other partners in addition to you. But that's not what it means, believe it or not. That was my working assumption, which was very wrong. And of course, we all know what happens when we assume. Edward assumed, and we learned. But it just means that somebody who is solo poly is seeking to maintain more than one intimate relationships, but they don't necessarily see them relationships merging where they have a primary partner. Solo poly people prioritize their own needs, their own goals, their personal growth while maintaining multiple relationships. They can be longer term, short term relationships, just like everything else in this world. But it really allows somebody to explore their relationships without conforming to structures or a hierarchy. And oftentimes, people who are solo poly will also not live with their partners. They will often maintain their own household and see their partners as things flow in their relationship. There's not that I live with my primary and see my secondary over here these days. It's somebody who typically lives independent and is polyamorous. So that's solo poly. Then there's parallel poly, which the easiest way to think of it is parallel lines. They go side by side and they never cross each other. And what parallel poly means is that partners engage in multiple relationships, but the relationships all act independent of each other. They don't cross, they don't intersect. They each go their own go their own way. Now, parallel poly doesn't mean that the people involved in it, the other straight lines that are going along never cross, don't know about the other partners because they do. Once again, this is all based on consent and communication. It just means that they don't interact. It doesn't mean if you were interested in somebody who said that they do parallel poly, that they would not allow you to speak to somebody that they're in a relationship with to verify that they know that you exist and they exist and all that vetting process that happens. That doesn't mean that at all. It just means that each relationship is unique and they are not integrating their partners together to form sort of a family or a social circle. Um, where that sort of family approach comes in is what is called kitchen table poly. It's where partners, communicate openly with each other. For example, you could have a woman who has two male partners, and the three of them could live together. It could be one big family. And of course, the whole gender thing is just sort of putting it out there. It can go any which way, gender wise, but it's a sort of a communal family loving relationship. So it's a situation where when there's an important decision, events, all those things, it's a comprehensive and harmonious dynamic where everyone works together. They all sit around the kitchen table together. So that would be kitchen table poly. And I think that's sometimes what those people who are perhaps newer to poly or just sort of hearing about it, don't know a lot about it. The kitchen table poly is how a lot of people envision polyamorous relationships. They all sit around the kitchen table and interact as a giant family. And that is how some people do it. But as we outlined before, there's many other ways to engage in poly. And while we're talking about different ways to engage in poly, I just want to put this out there because another misconception is, especially when we start involving BDSM or kink, the common theme that you hear is dominant. The dominant partner has multiple submissives in a relationship that they're all in this sort of relationship with. That is the way most people, when you combine the lifestyle with poly, tend to think. The reality is many, many relationships that blend the lifestyle and poly together are not that way. Um, the relationship I was in a relationship with a woman, and our relationship was, BDSM, DS, dom and sub, and the relationship with her primary partner was very vanilla. So you have relationships that may be vanilla with one person, maybe kinky with another, or maybe involve BDSM, and it's not all man has multiple women. That is kind of the stereotype. And the more I've explored and learned and grown in the lifestyle, the more I see poly as being people loving who they want, how they want, rather than that zany old stereotype of the dominant with multiple submissives. So I think it's kind of important that we take and blow misconception right out of the water. In fact, as I think about my friends who identify as poly, um, most of them are either in a relationship with a female who has more than one partner, or my friend is female and they have multiple male partners. So my personal sort of people that are in my circle or my friendship group that are poly, typically I can't think of one person in that where that fits the stereotype of man with one partner. It's quite actually the opposite. It's the women who have more partners. So just kind of, I don't know, one of those funny things, and I never really thought about it till I started talking, and boom, out it came. So the reason we see so much with poly and BDSM, and if you are new to BDSM, it can sometimes feel like, boy, everyone involved in this lifestyle is poly. Poly, poly. Everyone's, there's a poly person here, there's a poly person there, over there, and I'm monogamous. And I feel like it is, like I'm in the minority. And I think that the reason it can seem that way is because the world of BDSM and kink, that great big umbrella we have of a community that welcomes anybody and everybody, uh, under that umbrella, it's a place where people who are poly and they may not be kinky or into BDSM at all, but because our umbrella is so big and so welcoming, for years it was a community that before poly sort of was able to get, I don't want to say respectability because it's how people engage and how they find relationships that work for them, that should work for them. But I guess what I'm looking for more is stigmas. When some of the stigmas finally started to come away from being poly, before that started to happen, the BDSM, DS, kink lifestyle umbrella was a safe place that if you were poly, that you could go and find acceptance. You didn't have to be into kink, you didn't have to be into DS, but it was just a place that you could go and be accepted rather than being judged like you were out in the vanilla world. So it was a wonderful place, a safe place, for many people who were poly to come and interact and have and start to build and form, their own Build-A-Bear workshop of a community. So that's one of the reasons why you see so much poly in and around the lifestyle. I have no idea what the statistics say about people who are poly versus not poly in BDSM. Um, so I wouldn't hazard to guess which is more common. I just think that the lifestyle of BDSM and kink and once again under that umbrella is a place for everyone to be who they want to be, to learn, to grow, explore, to find out what works for them. So I think it's something that we see more common because it's a place where people can safely identify, a safe place, a safe haven to say this is me and I'm poly. I don't have to hide that here. I can just say it. And it's a wonderful thing. So I think that's why we see so much poly with the intersection of the lifestyle. And please understand also, like I said before, not every polyamorous relationship is kinky. It isn't. And sometimes, people who are in a poly relationship, like the one I was a part of, yes, the relationship that I shared, there was DS there. But with my partner and their primary, it was mostly vanilla with, maybe a sprinkle of kink here or there. So there's no surefire way to do it. It's a matter of finding what works for you. And I think it's important to recognize that definitely being poly doesn't mean that you are into BDSM. They can be totally distinct. Or one partner, the different relationships involved in a dynamic can some can be kinky, some cannot be. So it's very, very important to understand and to accept that people are going to find what works for them within each partnership. So there are just a couple of challenges, of course, that come with being poly. First of all, is the stigmas. I mean, I think in today's world, it would be more acceptable to say that you're into BDSM than it would be to say that I'm poly and I have a wife and a girlfriend. or we're poly and this is my wife and that's my wife's girlfriend. However it all works, I think in today's world, while it's getting easier and more talked about and more accepted, I actually feel that BDSM is more accepted than being poly. Um, Feel free to disagree with me on that, but that's just my own unscientific opinion. So you have the challenges of the stigmas, and then of course, because we're human beings, sometimes poly relationships can cause jealousy, communication issues, which makes being able to have those honest communications so super important, or the relationship is going to suffer and possibly even fail if you're not able to do that, as it did for me, because I wasn't able to communicate honestly and clearly. So yeah, epic fail for Edward. But that epic fail was an incredible learning experience for me. Not that I learned all those lessons immediately at the time, but they slowly percolated in, and I'm a better person for it. So that's the beauty of it. The other challenge that often gets talked about is called new relationship energy, and this often is abbreviated NRE, not NRA. We're not talking about rifles in America and all that stuff, but NRE. And new relationship energy, it happens even if you're monogamous, by the way. So when people who are poly talk about NRE, if you're a monogamous person, listen up, because you can definitely learn things there. And that new relationship energy is just that you've met somebody new, they're really exciting, you're into them, they're into you. They can do no wrong, you can do no wrong. It's that glorious part of when you really kind of first start dating, and the birds are chirping, the bees are buzzing, and the sky is filled with lollipops and rainbows. That's the NRE part. And the problem that, of course, comes in when you are polyamorous is you have multiple partners, and that new relationship energy can be something that can sort of pull you away from your existing partners because you want to spend more time with this wonderful new person. So it's a very challenging thing that needs to be recognized and addressed, and have plans sort of in place on how to navigate that. And so it's a challenging spot, but it's something that, like I said, even if you're monogamous, the more we can learn about NRE and how we can process it better, the more it's going to help, whether you identify as poly or mono, or you're somewhere in the middle just trying to figure it out. So that's a very important subject to educate yourself on, and rather than spend a couple hours talking about it, if that's of interest to you, uh, you know, hop in new relationship energy into Google, or ask Siri about it, and sort of go down that rabbit hole and start exploring. Now, finally, I want to talk about a book. I am a reader. I love books. And I know people these days, there's so many other alternatives to get information, that books aren't what they were. But if you are curious about poly, I would highly suggest picking up a copy. The book is called The Ethical Slut, and it's by Dossie, Easton, and Janet Hardy. It is fantastic, has wonderful, just wonderful, solid, good information. And if you're monogamous, pick up the book and read it, because even though it's kind of dedicated or geared towards people who are poly, there's so many relationship lessons in it that it will help your monogamous relationships. It's just an all around amazing relationship book. And Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy are also, they are also involved in the BDSM kink lifestyle. So you have a great relationship book written by kinktastic people. So that would be my recommendation, to pick that up and give it a read. So that is the 10,000 foot view of me, Edward, the Lightkeeper, on Poly. And I hope this was just sort of a eye opener, or a perhaps refresher, or a little bit of a get your feet wet with Poly episode. I didn't want to dive into it, and I hope you didn't take this to be, I hope I didn't come across as a sort of a preacher in church trying to convert anybody to be poly, be non-monogamous, or be monogamous. I didn't want to do that. I just sort of wanted to, here it is, explore it, learn about it, Educate yourself about it, even if it's not for you. The education and learning about it will definitely pay dividends and make your relationship stronger. So that was my goal. I hope I accomplished that today. I do want to thank you for setting aside some time and listening. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any more thunder, even though looking out the window, it's incredibly dark out when it shouldn't be. It should still be nice and light. So maybe I got this in before the rumbles and booms really kick off and get rolling, which would be fantastic because then I can sit back and have a glass of water with a little shot of lemon in it and just enjoy the storm. So that is actually what I'm going to do now. So once again, thank you for listening. No matter where you're listening, please don't forget to click the follow button so you never miss an episode. Of course, they come out every week on Tuesday. But when you click that follow button, you get the notification to remind you that there's a new episode. So please go ahead and do that. Thank you for listening. And next week, we are going to dive into something that may sound boring. And I promise you, I'll try not to make it boring, but it's something we need to talk about. We need to talk a little bit about the legal and ethical considerations of the lifestyle. And I do promise that there will be some fun, there will be some laughs, and we will make the legalese as fun as we can. And, hey, we do need to talk a little bit about ethics too. So that's where we're going to go next week as our journey into the lifestyle continues. So once again, thanks for listening, and I can't wait to chat with all of you next week.